Asking the right question in the right way can make a huge difference if we are going to be able to generate conversations versus shutting down conversations. And did you know that there is a planet that affects your communication? Yes, Mercury. And guess what? Mercury is in retrograde now until October 18th. So, what does this mean to us? Well, I always think of it as electronics, like when your internet goes down, like that just happened 3 minutes ago, or when your cell phone doesn't want to reply to emails. But it also can affect your conversations with people in all different forms of communication, right? Through email, through text messaging, through verbal conversations. So, we are going to be talking today about the questions that you want to be asking at the IEP table or even before you go to the IEP meeting. And how you ask them can, like we said in the beginning, either start a conversation or abruptly stop a conversation. So let's look at a few things that we can consider, whether or not we're astrologers. And I'm certainly not an astrologer, but I think it gives us some good tips that we can be looking at. So during this time, if you could look back on some, a recent communication that you might have had with others, and you might ask yourself, do you need to clarify what you've said or written to this person? Or do you need to continue a conversation with someone? Or do you need to restore communication with someone? And these are important questions for us to ask, not only during this time when Mercury's in retrograde, but throughout the year, right? Because I think as an advocate, the number one thing that I see that causes such a breakdown with families and schools is when communication breaks down and when trust is eroded. And so communication is a huge part of what we do as parents when we speak up for our children. It's a huge part of what I do every day as an advocate. So I want you to see, do you have some questions that are kind of like your go-to questions when you're thinking about going to an IEP meeting that are really effective for you to ask? So while you're typing that in the comments, what kinds of questions have you asked that have been really helpful? I will do a quick introduction. If you are new to our show, I am Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent of an adult son with Down syndrome, and I was a special ed teacher and a general ed teacher for 30 years, and now I do advocacy full-time for families. And it's something I'm passionate about, not just because I'm a parent, but I think because I also have that educator hat, that I really hope to bridge that gap between schools and families as we advocate for our kiddos. So type in the comments, say hi. Let us know if you have any questions that you like to ask at meetings. Anne Marie, hey there. And Lisa says, thanks for having such amazing information. Well, Lisa, thanks for being here. And I always want ideas. So if you have some ideas of new topics that you would like to see us have a show on, feel free to share that. Hey, Virginia from Connecticut. So let's look at some of these types of questions that we want to be asking. And before we get into the specific examples of questions that are helpful to ask, again, I think one of the mistakes that I see a lot of parents make during conversations with staff is that they'll ask a question, but they'll keep talking. So what I want you to do is to remember to ask your question. We want questions asked, but then to pause, right? Like take a time out and let that other person respond. And sometimes it's this kind of awkward silence, and we have to kind of be okay with that. Because when you're asking a question, you want to hear their response because that's going to help you have better understanding of the situation. So, my first tip of the day is to ask a question and then pause. Now, here are some questions that we're going to talk about, and these are, like technical IEP kinds of questions, some of these examples, but we're going to talk about why it's important that as a parent, you know this kind of information. So the first example is, how was the baseline data collected for this goal? Now, I'm sure you know that it can make a huge difference, right, with the tone that you use when you ask questions. So if you come off and say, how in the world was this baseline data even collected? That's probably going to derail the conversation, right? So we have to remember to ask our questions in a non-judgmental way with just this even tone of voice. Okay, so how is the baseline data collected for this goal? And if you already know the answer to that, you might still want to have that conversation to check what you think happened and what actually happened. And the reason why you want to know about baseline data is that that is going to be our measuring point, right? Where we start measuring, this is where my child is right now. And then from that, it helps us say a year from now, where do we want to be? The baseline data is also really important to know how it was collected because along the way, when there's progress monitoring happening, you want the special ed teacher or the speech therapist or whoever is doing it to be able to replicate that situation when your child was asked those questions or had to respond in a certain way for baseline. They ask that the same way when they do progress monitoring. So baseline data is like really important, right? And hello from Texas. And I heard a rumor from a Trailblazer parent that Texas is changing and shifting from going to calling their meetings ARD meetings for admission review dismissal to IEP meetings. So let me know if you've heard that. Lisa says dyslexia, how to get the school to help your child, especially when they don't have any program for dyslexia. Yeah, so a good question for that situation would be one, make sure that you've established previously in the IEP that your child does in fact have a dyslexia. And in the strength section, you want to identify I want to say best, most appropriate research-based learning strategy for reading. So having the strength section, how your child learns to read, it can be with, you can describe it as an explicit, multi-sensory program. And then in the needs, describe your child's reading needs, because then when you go to goal writing, you have to address those needs, right? And yes, maybe the school district doesn't have anybody right now, But that doesn't mean that they can't contract for somebody, because chances are there's a lot of kids in the district that probably need a reading specialist, right? So one, you want to make sure that you've established all that information and strengths and needs in the IEP, Lisa, sorry. And then you want to think ahead of time before the meeting, what kinds of questions can I ask? And I would suggest that you write them down. And those become kind of like your memory jogging notes that you look at during the meeting. It's really hard, I think, when you're on the spot to come up with, what am I going to say here? So think about it ahead of time. And so for others that are here, what do you think would be some good questions that could be asked when you kind of suspect that your child's reading needs aren't going to be met? And Lisa says they have not given him an IEP yet, only a 504, and have been fighting me for almost a year, ignore their own data to give OHI for IEP. Yeah, so that is a different case, right? And so that's a matter of, documenting your request for your child to be evaluated. If your child has been evaluated through the special ed process and you went to an evaluation meeting and the district team members were saying that your child doesn't qualify for an IEP, that might be kind of the back step that you need to go to. And if your child hasn't been evaluated, if you requested it in writing and they denied it, which they can do, but then they have to give you reason. So it really depends, Lisa, on lots of different variables. But you do want to make sure that if they've denied it, that they've sent you a prior written notice, which is an explanation of what they considered when you made that request, the documentation, the data that they used to make their decision, why they made that decision. And then you can kind of go to your next advocacy step. So it really kind of depends, right? And she says, thanks, great ideas. What happens if I have a language disorder but was never assessed? They have me an IEP, but back then they didn't do a full evaluation. What happens if I struggle just like my child who was assessed for language disorder? Why don't they take that into consideration? And they most definitely do, because if you're going to IEP meetings for your child, you have to be able to have meaningful parent participation. And so what you want to look at is, again, kind of thinking ahead of time, what are some questions that you want to ask during the meeting? And let's bring up a few more examples here, because that might be helpful. And it would be helpful if I showed the slides. Right. What exactly does my child need to meet this goal? Because so many times goals are written in such kind of difficult language to like pick apart and figure out what they're really saying. And when you're at IEP meetings, you need to be able to understand exactly what your child is going to do. So this is just a real simple, straightforward question that can be asked and can give you helpful information. So let's look at a few more. What about what information will be included in progress reports? And progress reports are probably coming to your house quite in a quick manner here, just because of the time of year. But if your progress reports aren't giving you helpful information, for one, you want the teachers to be able to share, like, this is what we share in a progress report. And if it's not going to be helpful information, then you need to follow up with other questions to say, how could we change this so I really understand more what my child is doing and the progress they've made. Another question that you might want to ask during a meeting or before the IEP meeting is, what's the best way for us to communicate? Different teachers have different preferences, and you want to be able to honor as much as you can their preferences. So, your child's general ed teacher may prefer email. The special ed teacher may say, let's talk on the phone. The science teacher might say, I'll send home, copies of what we're doing at school, and sending things back and forth works for me. So you want to establish different ways of communicating with the variety of people that work with your child. And that can be really important for all of us to be doing, right? This is one of my favorites questions to ask. And this comes from my good friend Kathy Snow, the author of Disability is Natural. And Kathy, one of her great questions that she would ask during her son's, Benjamin's IEP meetings was, what would it take to? So, Lisa, you might say to your staff, what would it take for my son to receive the reading services and supports he needs? Now, Lisa and others, a little known fact about 504 plans is that not only can they provide accommodations for your child, but technically you can also get services and supports through a 504 plan. Now, does that happen very often? No. Why? Because I think people don't know it's there. We have kind of been this, focus on 504 accommodations, 504 accommodations. But if you read, and I'm not an attorney, so I can't give you legal advice, but if you go and do some research about 504 plans, they actually can provide supports and services. That's going to be an uphill kind of climb, probably, to get your district to agree to that, because that's not something that they usually do, right? So Lisa, that could be one option, is to look at how you could get services and supports through the 504 plan if that roadblock is there and they're not seeing him eligible for special ed services through an IEP, right? So there are just lots of things that we have to take into consideration. The other thing is to ask, what options are there? I think so many times, especially when we get to near the end of the IEP, where we talk about placement, and, on most IEP forms, it gives spaces for, have you looked at, other options? Have you considered the educational benefit or harm for these options? But so many times those boxes are just like, check, yes, yes, we talked about this. And there's really not any discussion about it at your IEP meeting. So you do want to talk about options, and you do want to kind of weigh the pros and the cons, because without knowing what all the possibilities are as far as serving and supporting your child, you don't know what to pick, right? So asking a question like, what options are there, can be really helpful when you're at the IEP table or before you even get there. Now, here's another one that can be helpful, and it's just, am I correct in thinking? And then you kind of fill in the blank. Again, this is more of a neutral way to ask a question, instead of like, are you kidding me? I can't believe you're doing that. So these kinds of questions are things you want to have like on a little note card or written on the IEP so you can refer to them. But ask, am I correct in thinking that this means my child's going to be pulled out for reading instruction instead of receiving it in the classroom? And then you have that opportunity to have that conversation, have that dialogue about it. Or what would have to change in order to? So, Lisa, you could use this with your situation also. What would have to change at school for my son to get the appropriate reading instruction that he needs? What would have to change? And then you pause and you put the onus on the staff members to respond to that. So if this is making sense to you and if it's helpful, give us a thumbs up or heart for a like. And we will get back to your questions right in a couple minutes. I also wanted to share with you that we have a freebie this week. So it's an e-guide that I wrote about the art of asking questions. You'll get lots more examples and helpful tips in there. If you get our weekly email, you'll receive it tomorrow morning. If you're not getting my weekly emails, go to iep.today/weekly adv tips and you can get it there. So as a reminder that we talked about at the beginning was we want to ask non-judgmental questions. We want to check the tone of our voice and also our body language, because you can, be asking a nice neutral question, but if your body language is giving off this, like you are in their face, shaking your finger at them, there's a mismatch. And people usually say the body language is probably telling us really what's happening here and what this person is thinking. So you want to make sure when you're asking those non-judgmental questions that you also have, this neutral kind of body language that you're using. And so let's look at a few of these things. And so this was interesting. So if you just take a question like, do you believe he'll learn more in a general ed classroom? Now, if you were saying this to somebody verbally, it really depends on what word you emphasize, because that is going to change the message. So if you emphasize the word you, like, do you believe he'll learn more in a general ed classroom? The meaning behind that is going to be, what is your perspective? So you're asking for that particular person what their perspective is. But look how it changes when you change the focus of the word. If we focus on the word believe, like, do you believe he'll learn more in the general ed classroom? The message that you're sending is, are you sure? Like, is this something you really believe in your heart versus you're just like, I guess we have to do this? Or if you put the emphasis on the word he'll, do you believe he'll learn more in a general ed classroom? The message is about this particular student. So my son, we're talking about this one person. Do you believe he'll learn more in a general ed classroom? Or if we emphasize the word learn, do you believe he'll learn more? We want to know, is there an expectation that he can learn? Is the staff in a place where they believe that your child is competent and that your child can be expected to learn? Or if we emphasize the word more, do you believe he'll learn more in a general ed classroom? And this is developing that understanding that a general ed classroom is a better place for learning. But you need to see, are they seeing your child can learn more when they are included versus they still are holding on to that myth that education or some teaching in a special ed room is going to be better for a student. So you're trying to tease those things out and find out. Or lastly, if you emphasize the general ed classroom, so it's like, do you believe he'll learn more in a general ed classroom? And that is seeking out, do they know that segregated education classrooms are unacceptable? So I hope that makes some sense. It's just, I think, interesting of how we talk and the tone of voice, the body language, all of those things are going to have an impact on your conversations. And if they're going to generate more open-ended conversations versus when you ask yes or no questions that like really shut the dialogue down and don't allow for more dialogue. So be thinking of, and like I said, just ahead of time, write down some questions on your child's IEP that you want to be asking, and that can be really helpful. So let's see here. So as a reminder, this is what we first talked about, was to look back on recent communication that we've had with others, and we want to check, do we need to clarify what we've said or written? This would be a good time to go back and have another conversation or send a different email to explain something maybe to another person. Or do you need to continue a conversation with someone? Did the meeting end and you just feel like there wasn't closure? Maybe you need to pick up the phone and call that person and, continue talking with them. Or you step up, that we can engage in that conversation, that dialogue, instead of staying stuck in our own, positions. The other tip to remember is when you ask a question, then to pause and give that person time to respond. And then the whole idea, right, of checking your tone of voice, your body language, all of those things are important. So let's get back to your specific situations. And if we can help you brainstorm some questions that might work for what's happening with you right now. So let me see. So Lisa says, wow, great information, and definitely didn't know that. Anne-Marie, awesome. Love your follow-up guides. Oh, thanks, Anne-Marie. Yeah, and it's just a nice, it's called The Art of Asking Questions, and it's just a few pages, but it gives you examples and it gives you some additional resources that you can go for. So Anne-Marie gets our weekly email, so I know that she's getting it. And if you are new and aren't getting our weekly email, just go to right there and you'll get it. Hey, Karen. She says, hey, sorry I'm late. It's okay. We're all busy people, right? And you can always go back and catch the first part of the replay. So cool. And Corey is a trailblazer from Alabama, and she said, I learned to ask and pause for the answer. So yeah, that just really helps. And I think, as parents, it's really hard because talking about our children, whether it's in an IEP team meeting or in a parent-teacher conference or a hallway conversation, we're talking about our kid. It can be really emotional, and it's hard sometimes when we have like so many things, and it's just like, and I've been in this place too, where it's just like, I can't wait till they stop talking so I can hurry up and make my great point. And instead of doing that, if we can flip that and turn it to, what kind of a question can I ask here? Instead of what kind of a got you statement can I make right here? So I really find that that helps and can make a big difference. So, do you have a situation where you're thinking of like, what kind of a question could I ask to open this up for some dialogue? So let us know in the comments, um, because that conversation is like the key to everything. Like I said at the beginning, it's like communication and trust. Those are the two biggest factors of, if you're going to have a positive relationship with staff, and if they're going to have a positive relationship with you. So, as many of you know, I often say the three R's of advocacy are relationships, relationships, and relationships. So, to me, communication is the way that we develop those relationships. I don't see any other questions coming in or comments, so let me see. Um, okay, so here we have a question. She says, what happens? Oh, why don't they take that into consideration? So, yeah, and so like we had said, they really do. And, sometimes that's meeting with the staff ahead of time and going over things when you feel maybe more comfortable asking questions, or if you know that there's something that they can do to help kind of mitigate your language disorder, and if they show you visual examples of things that they're talking about, if that would help you understand it more, then ask for that. Because to me, that's just like a parent that speaks a different language than English, that they're entitled to interpreters at meetings. And as a parent with a language disorder, you also are entitled to additional supports that's going to help you process and understand the information. Most likely, you're going to have to identify what those are for the school, because they probably won't know. So if you say, if I can get things in writing at least a week ahead of time, so I have time to read through it real carefully and try to understand it. If somebody can be on the phone with me and answer some preliminary questions before we sit down for the IEP meeting, that would help me process things. So think about how you process both like written language and oral language, and make a written request that the staff provide those accommodations for you when you are at the IEP meeting. So let me know if that makes sense. And do you guys have any more questions? Um, it's already tomorrow's October. So one of the questions I have for you is, have you received your child's first progress report yet or not? Depending on when your school started, um, schools that started in early August, they might be getting to that 9-week timeline. And that's a pretty popular time when progress reports go home, like after 9 weeks of school. So because I'm a stickler for making sure that you get valuable information. So if you haven't gotten your progress report, one of the questions that you could ask the special ed teacher is, what kind of information will I be receiving with the progress report? Will it be more than a letter like P for passing or P for making progress? Or 3 for we haven't started working on this goal yet. None of that really is very helpful. So one of the basic questions to ask is, what information will be on the progress report? And then you need to say whether or not that's going to be helpful. And if not, you can say, how could we change this so I get more valuable information? Alrighty. So I think we have covered your questions for today. We will be back next Thursday. We are here every Thursday at noon Mountain Time. And I appreciate all the work that you do, because it is work to advocate for your child. I'm glad that we can have these weekly times where I can provide some, free suggestions for families. And Karen says, thanks, Charmaine. Well, thank you, Karen. And Karen is a trailblazer from Colorado. So we will return. I want to make sure that you know that this can be a place where you can get support. As you see, I think when we do our weekly shows, there are parents from around the country that have had different experiences. And when we share those, when we have a conversation here, that helps us all be more connected, and it helps create change all over the country. So I am Charmaine Tanner. I am here to make sure that your child is safe, happy, and learning every day at school, and to support you on this journey through the special ed process. So until next week, take care, and we shall see you